The Zenith Institute prided itself on being the most prestigious educational facility in 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Its crystalline spires reached toward twin suns, its corridors hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology, and its student body represented 43 different species from across known space. What it did not pride itself on, however, was dealing with the absolute chaos that humans seemed to bring wherever they went. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Liam adjusted his teaching tablet and surveyed his xenobiology classroom with the kind of optimism that only came from being blissfully unaware of the impending disaster. At 26 standard galactic years, he was absurdly young to be teaching at such a prestigious institution, but his doctoral thesis on interspecies cellular adaptation had caused quite the stir in academic circles. The fact that he'd written it while simultaneously completing his medical certification and learning 6 alien languages had only added to his reputation as one of those insufferably brilliant humans who made everyone else look lazy. By comparison. "Good morning, class," Liam announced, his voice carrying easily across the semicircular amphitheater. The acoustic design was flawless. Naturally, everything at Zenith was flawless, except perhaps their vetting process for human instructors. 28 pairs of eyes, some compound, some with vertical pupils, some that glowed softly in spectrums beyond human perception, turned toward him with varying degrees of attention. Liam had grown accustomed to the diversity of his students over the past 3 months. There was Kala, whose sleek fur shifted colors with her moods, and whose species bore an uncomfortable resemblance to Earth cats, if Earth cats had opposable thumbs and doctoral degrees in biochemistry. Brix sat in the back row, his scaled hide gleaming under the classroom's full-spectrum lighting. Occasionally flicking his forked tongue to taste the air in a gesture Liam had learned, indicated deep concentration rather than hunger. Neth perched on a specially designed seat that accommodated their 4 arms and chitinous exoskeleton, antennae twitching with what Liam hoped was intellectual curiosity, and not impending molt. Today we'll be examining the fascinating adaptations that allow certain species to thrive in methane-rich atmospheres, Liam continued, pulling up a 3-dimensional molecular diagram that hovered above his desk like a constellation of scientific possibility. What he failed to notice, being human, and therefore possessing disappointingly limited peripheral vision compared to most of his students, was the series of meaningful glances being exchanged throughout the classroom. Kala's tail twitched twice, a signal that would have been perfectly clear to anyone familiar with Felinian nonverbal communication. Brix's throat pouch inflated slightly, a barely perceptible acknowledgement among his people. Neth's secondary arms made a subtle gesture that roughly translated to "prepare for implementation of Plan Zeta." The students of Zenith Institute were, without exception, brilliant individuals who had earned their places through rigorous testing and evaluation. They were scholars, researchers, future diplomats, and scientists. They were also, it should be noted, remarkably creative when it came to circumventing rules they found particularly unreasonable. The Galactic Academic Exchange Program had many regulations. Most made sense. No weapons in dormitories, no unauthorized genetic experiments in shared laboratories, no ritualistic combat during final examinations, but buried in subsection 43 of the facility handbook was a rule that had caused considerable consternation among students from species that formed strong emotional bonds with their offspring. No companion animals or juvenile dependents are permitted in educational facilities during instructional periods. To the administrators who had written this rule, it seemed perfectly reasonable. Educational environments required focus and discipline. Juvenile beings, regardless of species, were notorious for their unpredictable behavior and tendency toward disruption. The rule was clear, sensible, and universally ignored by at least 60% of the student body. The key to understanding atmospheric adaptation, Liam explained, manipulating the holographic model with practiced ease, lies in the modification of hemoglobin analogs to a soft chittering sound interrupted his lecture. It was quiet, barely audible, and seemed to come from somewhere near Neth's seating area. Liam paused, glancing in that direction, but saw nothing unusual. Neth sat perfectly still, all four arms folded in attentive posture, compound eyes focused on the molecular display. As I was saying, Liam continued, the binding affinity of these modified proteins allows for inforthio. This time, the sound was a gentle mewing, unmistakably feline in nature, despite originating from an alien throat. Liam's eyes found Kala, who appeared to be taking notes with dedicated focus, her stylus moving across her tablet in swift, precise strokes. Liam had been teaching long enough, admittedly, not very long, but long enough to recognize the particular quality of classroom atmosphere that indicated his students were up to something. It was the same feeling he'd experienced during his graduate seminars when his fellow students were planning some elaborate prank or protest. The air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained mischief. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should take a brief break to address whatever's causing these ambient sound effects." 28 faces turned toward him, with expressions of such studied innocence that Liam immediately knew he was in trouble. In his experience, genuine innocence never looked quite so polished. "I'm not sure what you mean, Instructor Liam," Kala said, her voice carrying the melodic cadences of her species. Her fur, Liam noted, had shifted to a particularly vibrant shade of blue-green that he'd learned indicated either deep contentment or successful deception. Given the circumstances, he suspected the latter. "The sounds," Liam clarified. "There have been several instances of what I can only describe as animal vocalizations during my lecture. Perhaps it's the ventilation system," Bricks suggested helpfully. "These older buildings sometimes develop acoustic anomalies." The Zenith Institute was exactly 18 months old and incorporated technology that wouldn't be developed on Earth for another 2 centuries, but Liam decided not to point this out. Instead, he activated his tablet's audio sensors and waited. For exactly 37 seconds, the classroom was perfectly silent. Then, as if responding to some invisible signal, a chorus of soft sounds erupted from various locations throughout the amphitheater. Chirping, mewing, chittering, and several vocalizations that didn't exist in any human language, but somehow conveyed an unmistakable sense of youthful enthusiasm. "Okay," Liam said, setting down his tablet with the kind of deliberate calm that preceded either enlightenment or complete breakdown. "I'm going to ask this once, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Does anyone have unauthorized fauna in my classroom?" The silence that followed was so complete that Liam could hear the subtle hum of the building's atmospheric processors. 28 faces gazed at him with varying expressions of confusion, concern, and what might charitably be described as diplomatic immunity. "Define fauna," Neth said finally, their translator rendering the words in perfectly neutral tones. Liam blinked. In 3 months of teaching xenobiology to some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy, he had never been asked to define such a basic term. Living beings that are not sapient students enrolled in this institution? "Ah," said Kala, her tail performing a complex spiral motion that Liam was fairly certain indicated satisfaction. In that case, no. The mewing sound returned, louder this time and definitely coming from Kala's general vicinity. Liam walked slowly down the stepped aisle toward her seat, his enhanced human hearing trying to pinpoint the source. As he approached, he noticed a slight bulge in Kala's academic robes that hadn't been there at the beginning of class. "Kala," he said gently, "what's in your robes?" "Nothing unauthorized," she replied with the kind of technical precision that made Liam's human brain hurt. Before he could formulate a response that addressed both the letter and spirit of academic regulations, a small furry head poked out from the folds of Kala's robes. The creature, for lack of a better term, was unmistakably juvenile, with oversized eyes, disproportionately large ears, and fur that shifted through the same color spectrum as Kala's, but at a much faster rate, creating a rainbow strobe effect that was simultaneously adorable and mildly hypnotic. "That," Liam said with admirable restraint, "appears to be a small being." "This is Wisp," Kala announced with obvious pride. "My offspring." "Your offspring," Liam repeated slowly, as his human brain processed the implications. "Not a pet. Not a companion animal. Your actual child." "Correct," Kala confirmed. "Therefore, not in violation of facility regulations regarding companion animals." Liam opened his mouth to point out that the regulation clearly mentioned juvenile dependents as well. But before he could speak, similar small heads began appearing throughout the classroom. From Brix's thermal pouch emerged a tiny, scaled being with golden eyes and a tongue that flickered with curiosity. Neth's seating area revealed no fewer than 3 small chitinous creatures, each no larger than a human thumb, but possessing the same complex compound eyes as their parent. Within moments, Liam's xenobiology classroom had transformed into what appeared to be the galaxy's most diverse nursery. Small beings of various species chittered, mewed, chirped, and made sounds that his human ears couldn't even categorize. They ranged in size from Neth's thumb-sized offspring to what appeared to be a young crystalline being that refracted the classroom lighting into rainbow patterns across the walls. "How many?" Liam asked weakly. 20, Kala replied, with the tone of someone announcing a perfectly reasonable number. 20 offspring. In my classroom. Right now. "Yes," confirmed Brix, his throat pouch inflating with what Liam had learned indicated either pride or imminent regurgitation. Given the circumstances, he hoped for the former. Liam looked around at his students, brilliant, accomplished beings, who had somehow managed to smuggle 20 juvenile dependents into one of the most secure educational facilities in known space. The small beings were already beginning to move, climbing down from their hiding spots and exploring their new environment with the fearless curiosity that seemed universal among young creatures regardless of species. "This island," Liam began, then stopped as he realized he had no adequate words in any of the 6 alien languages he'd learned. "This is going to be a problem." That was when the first cub, he found himself thinking of them as cubs, regardless of their actual species. Classifications wandered over to his feet and sat down with a soft, contented sigh. The universe, Liam reflected as he stared down at the small, furry being, now using his left foot as a pillow, had a twisted sense of humor. He'd spent years studying the behavioral patterns of alien species, memorizing their social structures, learning their languages, and preparing himself for every conceivable challenge of interspecies education. Somehow, what to do when 20 alien babies decide you're their new favorite piece of furniture had never appeared in any of his textbooks. The cub at his feet, definitely Felinian in origin. With Kala's distinctive color-shifting fur made a sound that fell somewhere between a purr and a musical note. It was, Liam had to admit, unreasonably adorable, which was problematic, because his human brain was already beginning to release those particular chemicals that made mammals want to protect small, helpless creatures with large eyes and soft fur. "Okay," he said, using his best instructor voice, the one that had successfully convinced graduate committees that he knew what he was talking about. "Everyone needs to collect their offspring and return them to wherever they're supposed to be. The facility regulations are quite clear about." He was interrupted by a sound that could only be described as a collective "awb," emanating from 19 other small beings as they abandoned their hiding spots and made their way toward him with the determined waddle of creatures who had found something infinitely more interesting than their designated caregivers. "No," Liam said firmly, taking a step backward. "Absolutely not. Return to your parents? Guardians? Primary care units?" The cubs, apparently unfamiliar with the concept of human authority, continued their advance. Within moments, Liam found himself surrounded by a diverse array of juvenile aliens, all of whom seemed convinced that his feet represented the ideal location for an impromptu gathering. A small, scaled being, one of Brix's offspring, judging by the iridescent green coloration, climbed onto his right foot and settled in with a contented chirp. Two of Neth's children, each no bigger than his thumb, claimed positions on his shoelaces and began making soft, chittering sounds that his translation software identified as "Happy Nest Song." "This isn't happening," Liam muttered, looking up at his students who were watching the proceedings with expressions ranging from amused to deeply satisfied. "Please tell me this isn't actually happening." "It appears to be happening," observed a student from the back row, one of the Blade, crystalline beings whose name Liam could never quite pronounce correctly. "Most fascinating behavioral pattern." "They've never done this before," Kala added helpfully. "Usually they're quite shy around other species." "Wonderful," Liam said, as a small creature that appeared to be made entirely of translucent blue gel oozed over his left ankle. "I'm honored to be their first interspecies foot warmer." That was when his classroom door chimed with the particular tone reserved for administrative visits. Liam's blood, already running at slightly elevated temperatures due to the stress of discovering his classroom, had become an unauthorized nursery, immediately went cold. The door slid open with the whisper-quiet efficiency that characterized all technology at Zenith Institute, revealing a figure that made every student in the classroom suddenly develop an intense interest in their note tablets. Administrator Wex stood in the doorway, their imposing form filling the frame with the kind of presence that suggested extensive experience in dealing with academic crises. Wex belonged to a species that humans had never encountered before the Galactic Academic Exchange Program, and Liam still wasn't entirely sure how to categorize them biologically. They possessed a humanoid body structure, but with skin that shifted between deep purple and silver, depending on their mood, 4 arms that moved with predatory grace, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their surroundings with mechanical precision. What Liam did know was that Wex had been running Zenith Institute's day-to-day operations for the past 5 years, with ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for disruptions to academic protocols. "Instructor Liam," Wex said, their voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded either very good news or very, very bad news. "I've received reports of unusual acoustic disturbances originating from your classroom." Liam looked down at the 20 small beings now arranged around, his feet in what appeared to be a carefully organized formation. Several were purring, others were humming, and at least 3 were making sounds that seemed designed specifically to trigger protective responses in any creature with functioning auditory organs. "I can explain," he said, which was absolutely untrue, but seemed like the appropriate thing to say under the circumstances. Wex's gaze swept the classroom, taking in the sight of 28 adult students attempting to look invisible and 20 juvenile aliens treating their instructor's feet like some sort of sacred gathering ground. Their skin shifted toward a deeper purple shade that Liam had learned indicated either deep thought or impending administrative action. "Interesting," Wex said finally. "And by interesting, I mean catastrophically inappropriate for an educational environment. They just appeared," Liam offered weakly. "One moment I was lecturing about atmospheric adaptation, and the next moment I was apparently running an unlicensed childcare facility. The regulations regarding juvenile dependence on academy grounds are quite explicit," Wex continued, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be several pages of official text. Section 43. Subsection 12 clearly states that no unauthorized minors are permitted in educational facilities during instructional periods. "Yes," said Kala, speaking up with the kind of confidence that suggested she had been preparing for this moment. However, Section 43, subsection 12, paragraph 8, includes an exception for educational observation experiences conducted under direct faculty supervision for the purpose of interspecies behavioral study. Wex's 4 eyes blinked in a sequence that Liam was fairly certain indicated surprise. "Are you suggesting that this gathering constitutes an approved educational observation experience?" "Well," said Brix, his throat pouch inflating with what Liam now recognized as barely contained mischief, "Instructor Liam is certainly observing our offspring's behavior, and we're learning quite a bit about interspecies interaction patterns. The cubs appear to have formed an unprecedented multispecies social grouping centered around human proximity," added Neth, their antennae twitching with what appeared to be genuine scientific excitement. "This represents a unique opportunity for behavioral analysis." Liam stared at his students, impressed despite himself by their creative interpretation of academic regulations. It was completely ridiculous, utterly unauthorized, and he had to admit, actually quite brilliant. They had essentially turned their rule violation into a spontaneous research opportunity. "That's," Wex began, then paused as one of the cubs, a small creature that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a disco ball, fluttered up from Liam's feet and landed on their outstretched arm. The administrator's skin immediately shifted to a lighter shade of purple, and their expression softened in a way that Liam had never seen before. "Oh," Wex said quietly, as the small being settled into the crook of their arm and began making soft musical sounds. "Oh my." What happened next would later be described in official reports as an unprecedented administrative response to an unusual academic situation. What actually happened was that Wex, the terror of students and faculty alike, experienced what could only be described as an acute case of protective instincts triggered by exposure to juvenile alien cuteness. "This island," Wex said, their voice taking on a softer quality as more cubs began migrating toward them. "This is highly irregular." "Yes," Liam agreed, watching in fascination as his most feared administrative supervisor was systematically conquered by an army of adorable alien babies. "Highly irregular." The situation deteriorated further or improved dramatically, depending on one's perspective, when additional cubs decided that Wex's 4 arms represented prime real estate for napping purposes. Within minutes, the administrator who struck fear into the hearts of faculty members across 3-star systems was standing in the middle of a xenobiology classroom, covered in small alien beings, making soft cooing sounds that their translator software was politely declining to render into standard galactic. "We should probably," Liam began, then stopped, as he realized he had no idea how to finish that sentence. Call for backup? Evacuate the classroom? Document this for posterity? His decision was made for him when his classroom door chimed again. This time, with the rapid triple tone that indicated emergency administrative response. The door slid open to reveal what appeared to be half the institute's senior staff, led by a figure that made even Wex's imposing presence seem modest by comparison. Dr. Fenwick, head of interspecies relations and one of the few humans in senior administration, stepped into the classroom and immediately stopped dead in his tracks. His gaze swept from Liam, standing ankle-deep in alien cubs, to Wex, who appeared to have been transformed into some sort of living jungle gym for juvenile beings, to 28 students who were now openly taking recordings of the entire proceeding. "Well," Dr. Fenwick said, after a moment of stunned silence, "this is new." Behind him, several other administrators and faculty members crowded into the doorway, creating what could only be described as an academic traffic jam. Liam could hear whispered conversations in at least 6 different languages, most of which seemed to involve variations on the phrase, "Are those babies? And why are they all sitting on the human?" The cubs, apparently sensing that they had acquired a larger audience, responded by increasing their vocalizations. The classroom filled with a symphony of purring, chittering, humming, and several sounds that bypassed the auditory cortex entirely and went straight to the part of the brain responsible for wanting to protect small, helpless creatures. "Instructor Liam," Dr. Fenwick said, with the kind of calm that comes from 20 years of dealing with the unexpected consequences of interspecies education, "would you mind explaining why your xenobiology lecture appears to have transformed into what I can only describe as the galaxy's most diverse daycare center?" Liam looked down at the small beings arranged around his feet, up at Wex, who was now making soft humming sounds in harmony with their tiny passengers, and across at his students, who were clearly enjoying every moment of the unfolding chaos. "Honestly," he said, "I have absolutely no idea." That was when the cubs began to exhibit their first truly unusual behavior. As if responding to some invisible signal, they all turned toward the doorway where the administrators stood watching. 20 pairs of large, expressive eyes focused on the assembled authority figures with an intensity that was somehow both adorable and slightly unnerving. Then, in perfect synchronization, they all made the same sound, a soft, musical note that seemed to resonate at exactly the frequency required to trigger protective responses in every species represented in the doorway. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Dr. Fenwick's expression softened. 2 of the other administrators actually took a step forward. Even the maintenance technician, who had been called to check on the acoustic disturbances, peeked around the doorframe and made a sound that his translation software rendered as "aw." "That's definitely not normal juvenile behavior," observed one of the faculty members. "No," agreed Dr. Fenwick, his scientific training apparently overriding his administrative concerns. "No, it most certainly is not." What happened next would later be studied in xenobiology programs across the galaxy as either the most significant breakthrough in interspecies relations in recorded history, or the most elaborate practical joke ever perpetrated by a coordinated group of alien students. The jury was still out on which interpretation was correct. Dr. Fenwick stepped fully into the classroom, his trained scientific mind clearly overriding his administrative instincts. He crouched down to observe the cubs more closely, and Liam watched in fascination as several of the small beings immediately oriented toward the older human with obvious interest, though they made no move to leave their positions around Liam's feet. "Fascinating," Dr. Fenwick murmured, pulling out a small recording device. "They show clear recognition of human presence, but their bonding behavior appears specifically focused on—" He looked up at Liam. "How long have you been in contact with these juveniles?" "About 15 minutes," Liam replied. "And I use the term contact loosely, since they basically claimed my feet as sovereign territory without consulting me first. The behavioral pattern began immediately upon exposure." Dr. Fenwick's eyebrows rose in a way that suggested significant scientific implications. No gradual approach phase, no species-specific recognition protocols. "They just sat down?" Liam said helplessly. "Like I was some sort of juvenile alien magnet." Behind Dr. Fenwick, the growing crowd of administrators and faculty members continued to whisper among themselves. Liam could make out fragments of conversation in multiple languages, most of which seemed to center around terms like unprecedented, impossible, and someone called the Galactic Research Council. That was when Wex, still draped in assorted small beings, spoke up with the kind of revelation that tends to change the course of scientific understanding. "They're not random juveniles," Wex said quietly, their voice carrying a note of dawning comprehension. "Look at the species representation." Dr. Fenwick's gaze swept across the 20 cubs, arranged around Liam's feet, and Liam watched his expression shift from scientific curiosity to something approaching awe. Felinian, reptilian prime, insectoid collective, crystalline consortium, gelloid commonwealth. Dr. Fenwick began listing off species names as his eyes moved from cub to cub. These aren't just any juveniles. These represent the primary diplomatic species in the current Galactic Education Council. "Meaning?" Liam asked, though he was beginning to suspect that the answer would somehow make his life significantly more complicated. "Meaning," said a new voice from the doorway, "that you are currently serving as a living security blanket for the children of some of the most powerful beings in known space." The entire classroom turned toward the voice, and Liam felt his heart sink as he recognized the figure standing in the entrance. Ambassador Kolf of the Galactic Education Council was not someone who made casual social visits to academic institutions. They were the kind of being who showed up when interspecies incidents required immediate diplomatic intervention. Kolf belonged to a species that humans had never successfully categorized, partly because they seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, and partly because they had a habit of changing their physical appearance to match the expectations of whoever was observing them. To Liam, they appeared as a tall, elegant figure with features that suggested ancient wisdom and the kind of authority that could reshape political alliances with a single conversation. Dr. Fenwick said, rising quickly to his feet. "We weren't expecting—" "No," Kolf agreed, gliding into the classroom with movements that seemed to bypass several laws of physics. "You were not. However, when the juvenile offspring of 18 different species simultaneously begin exhibiting unprecedented behavioral patterns, the Council takes notice." Liam blinked. 18? "I count 20 cubs, but they only represent maybe 8 or 9 species. The others," Kolf said, with what might have been amusement, "are currently on their way here, along with their parents." The classroom fell silent, except for the soft sounds of contentment emanating from the cubs. Liam looked down at the small beings around his feet, who seemed completely oblivious to the political implications of their nap-time choices. "Parents," he repeated slowly, as in the actual parents of these cubs, who are presumably important political figures, are coming here now. "Indeed," Kolf confirmed. "Representatives from the Felinian hegemony, the Reptilian Empire, the Insectoid Collective, and 12 other major political entities. They should arrive within the next galactic standard hour." Wex made a sound that their translator rendered as "oh dear," which Liam suspected was a significant understatement. "Perhaps," Dr. Fenwick suggested, with the kind of diplomatic optimism that suggested extensive experience in crisis management, "we should move this gathering to a more appropriate venue? The main conference hall, perhaps?" The response from the cubs was immediate and unanimous. 20 small voices raised in what could only be described as protest, ranging from indignant chirping to what sounded like tiny roars of disapproval. Several of the cubs pressed closer to Liam's feet, as if anticipating separation. "They don't want to move," Kala observed helpfully. "I can see that," Dr. Fenwick replied. "The question is why." "Perhaps," said Kolf, moving closer to examine the cubs with obvious interest, "the question is not why they resist moving, but why they chose this particular location in the first place." They gestured toward Liam with one of their appendages, the number of which seemed to vary depending on the angle of observation. "What is it about this specific human that has triggered such a remarkable response?" Dr. Fenwick pulled out a more sophisticated scanning device and aimed it in Liam's direction. "Elevated stress markers, slightly increased body temperature, standard human pheromone production for a male in his mid-20s. He paused, studying the readout. "Wait, that's interesting." "What's interesting?" Liam asked, though he was beginning to learn that interesting, in academic contexts, usually meant life-changing in ways you won't enjoy. "Your bioelectric field?" Dr. Fenwick said, adjusting his scanner. "It's resonating at a frequency that I've never seen in human readings before." "Is that bad?" Liam asked. "Please tell me that's not bad." "Not bad," Dr. Fenwick assured him, "but definitely unusual. The pattern appears to be—" "Hold on." He made several adjustments to his device, then looked up with an expression of dawning amazement. "Your bioelectric signature is producing a harmonic resonance pattern that matches the optimal frequency for juvenile neural development across multiple species." Liam stared at him. "In simple terms? You're broadcasting a signal that makes alien babies feel safe and happy," Wex explained, their voice muffled slightly by the small beings using their arms as perches. "How is that possible?" Liam demanded. "I'm human. I don't have magic baby-calming powers." "Actually," said Kolf thoughtfully, "you might." The ambassador moved closer, their forms seeming to shift and solidify as they focused their attention on Liam. "Tell me, Instructor Liam, what do you know about your genetic heritage?" "The usual human stuff," Liam replied, uncertainly. "European and African ancestry, some genetic markers for enhanced pattern recognition, the standard human immune system adaptations." "And your family history? Any unusual occupations? Exposure to non-terrestrial influences?" Liam frowned, thinking back through what he knew of his family background. "My grandmother was a xenobiologist, first generation to study alien life forms after first contact. She spent most of her career working with newly contacted forhims, species, helping establish communication protocols. "Ah," said Kolf, with evident satisfaction. "And how many alien species did your grandmother work with during her career?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe 50 or 60? She was one of the pioneers in the field, worked on establishing peaceful contact with—" Liam stopped mid-sentence as the implications hit him. "You think I inherited something from her? Some kind of genetic adaptation?" "Not inherited," Kolf corrected. "Developed. Your grandmother's prolonged exposure to alien bioelectric fields during crucial developmental periods in dozens of species would have required significant adaptive responses from her human physiology. Those adaptations, refined over decades of interspecies contact, would have influenced her genetic expression in ways that could absolutely be passed to subsequent generations." Dr. Fenwick was scanning Liam with increasing excitement, his device beeping and chiming with rapid-fire data collection. "Remarkable. Your neural pathways show modifications that are consistent with enhanced empathic response capabilities. Your pheromone production includes compounds that don't exist in baseline human biochemistry. And your bioelectric field." He paused, staring at his readouts. "Your bioelectric field is essentially broadcasting a universal, safe adult signal that appears to be recognized by juvenile beings across multiple species classifications." "So I'm what?" "Exactly?" Liam asked. "A walking alien baby magnet? You're the first documented human with genetically inherited interspecies empathic adaptations," Kolf said, with what Liam was learning to recognize as barely contained excitement. "You represent a completely new branch of human development, one that could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies cooperation." Before Liam could process the full implications of this revelation, his classroom door chimed again with a sequence of tones he'd never heard before. A complex, harmonic pattern that his translation software identified as incoming diplomatic convoy. "That would be the parents," Kolf announced unnecessarily. The door slid open to reveal what could only be described as a diplomatic delegation of epic proportions. Tall, elegant felinians with fur that shimmered like living rainbows. Massive reptilian beings whose scales reflected the classroom lighting in hypnotic patterns. Graceful insectoids, whose wings created subtle musical tones as they moved. Representatives from species Liam recognized from his textbooks and several he'd never seen before. They filed into the classroom with the kind of formal procession usually reserved for interplanetary summits, their expressions ranging from diplomatic curiosity to barely contained parental concern. At the sight of their offspring contentedly arranged around a young human instructor's feet, several of them made sounds that transcended species barriers in their obvious relief and amazement. "Honored parents," Kolf announced formally, "I present Instructor Liam, who appears to have made a remarkable discovery about human-juvenile interspecies compatibility. The largest of the reptilian beings, whose scales suggested high rank within their social hierarchy, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. My offspring has not been this calm since hatching. What manner of human possesses such abilities?" "A very confused one," Liam replied honestly, which prompted what sounded like laughter from several different species simultaneously. "The cubs chose him," said Kala, rising from her seat to address the assembled parents. "We brought them to observe his teaching, and they immediately claimed him as their preferred gathering spot. This was not accidental," observed one of the felinian representatives, whose fur patterns suggested significant political importance. "We have been monitoring our offspring's behavioral patterns since they began requesting to offspring accompany their older siblings to educational facilities. They spoke of a kind teacher who smells like safety." "Smells like safety," Liam repeated. "Pheromone interpretation varies by species," Dr. Fenwick explained quietly, "but the concept translates across multiple sensory modalities." The insectoid representative stepped forward, their antennae twitching in patterns that Liam's translation software identified as formal diplomatic communication. "Our youngest have spoken of dreams featuring a tall, soft one who sings quiet songs. We assumed this was typical juvenile imagination." "Apparently not," Wex observed, still serving as a living jungle gym for several cubs who showed no inclination to reunite with their actual parents. That was when one of the smaller Felinian parents made an announcement that changed everything. "This was a test," they said simply. The classroom fell silent except for the continued sounds of contentment from the cubs. "I beg your pardon?" Dr. Fenwick said carefully. "A test?" the Felinian repeated. "To determine if humans could be trusted with our most precious possessions. Our children have been requesting contact with this specific instructor for weeks. We chose to honor their wishes and observe the results." Kolf's form shifted in what Liam had learned indicated significant interest. "You deliberately arranged for your offspring to make contact with Instructor Liam?" "We arranged for the opportunity," corrected the large reptilian parent. "The choice was theirs to make." Liam looked around the room at the diplomatic representatives, the confused administrators, his gleefully satisfied students, and the 20 small beings who had somehow decided he was their favorite human. So this entire situation was an elaborate test of my childcare abilities? "Not childcare," said another parent, this one from a species Liam couldn't immediately identify. "Trust, the ability to protect and nurture that which is most valuable to us, and you passed." "What exactly does that mean?" Liam asked, though he suspected the answer would fundamentally change his understanding of his role at Zenith Institute. "It means," said Kolf with unmistakable satisfaction, "that you have just become the first human to be offered joint custody of the children of 18 different species. Congratulations, Instructor Liam. You're about to become the most important human in interspecies relations since first contact." The cubs, apparently sensing that important decisions were being made about their future, looked up at Liam with expressions of such hopeful expectation that his human brain immediately capitulated to whatever cosmic forces had decided to rearrange his life. "Well," he said weakly, looking down at 20 pairs of trusting eyes, "I guess I'd better figure out how to teach xenobiology with an audience." 3 weeks later, Liam stood before his xenobiology class with the kind of confidence that only came from having survived what the Galactic Education Council was now officially calling the Great Interspecies Custody Incident. The fact that this incident had resulted in his promotion to Director of Human Juvenile Interaction Studies was still something his brain refused to fully process. 20 cubs sat in perfect formation around his feet, occasionally making soft sounds of contentment that his students had learned to incorporate into their note-taking rhythm. What had once been chaos was now the galaxy's most unusual educational innovation. Today, we'll examine symbiotic relationships in extreme environments, Liam announced, manipulating a holographic display that showed crystalline formations growing in what appeared to be liquid nitrogen. Notice how these organisms have developed complementary survival strategies that a small chirp interrupted him. Without missing a beat, Liam reached down and gently scratched behind the ears of Wisp Kala's offspring, who immediately settled back into contented silence. As I was saying, Liam continued seamlessly, the interdependence between these species demonstrates that cooperation often produces results that individual adaptation cannot achieve. In the back row, Wex sat taking notes with obvious satisfaction. The administrator had become the Cubs' second favorite human, a development that had done wonders for interdepartmental relations. Their official reports now included regular updates on juvenile integration progress and optimal human-alien infant interaction protocols. Dr. Fenwick observed from the corner, his recording equipment documenting what would become the foundational research for an entirely new field of study. The Galactic Research Council had already approved funding for the Liam Protocol, a comprehensive study of human genetic adaptations for interspecies childcare. The most remarkable example, Liam said, gesturing to his live audience of 20 different species, is when completely different biological systems recognize common needs and develop unexpected solutions. As if responding to some invisible cue, the Cubs all looked up at him with expressions of pure adoration. The effect still made his heart do something complicated every time it happened. Sometimes, he added with a grin, the best scientific discoveries happen when someone breaks the rules in exactly the right way. Kala raised her hand. Instructor Liam, does this mean humans are naturally designed for galactic childcare duties? It means, Liam replied, looking down at his unusual teaching assistants, that the universe has a sense of humor, and apparently mine involves becoming the galaxy's most overqualified babysitter. The Cubs purred, chirped, and hummed in harmonious agreement. After class, as his students filed out with the easy camaraderie that came from shared conspiracy, Liam found himself alone with his unusual charges. The Cubs had developed their own post-lecture routine, arranging themselves in a perfect circle around his desk, while he graded assignments and prepared for the next day's chaos. You know, he said to them conversationally, when I applied for this position, I thought the biggest challenge would be explaining complex biochemistry to beings with entirely different sensory systems. I never imagined I'd become a professional alien infant whisperer. Wisp mewed softly in response, and one of Neth's offspring began playing what sounded like a tiny harmonica with their chitinous appendages. His tablet chimed with a message from the Galactic Research Council. The subject line read, "Congratulations. Your research proposal for advanced interspecies juvenile behavioral studies has been approved for full funding." The grant amount that followed made Liam's eyes widen considerably. Well, he murmured to his attentive audience, looks like you're all going to be famous. The first officially recognized interspecies nursery program in galactic history. A small gel-based cub oozed up onto his desk and somehow managed to convey approval through a series of color changes that shifted from deep blue to warm gold. From the doorway, Ambassador Kolf watched with satisfaction. The updated facility handbook would need an entirely new section, but some rules, they reflected, were meant to be beautifully, chaotically broken, especially when breaking them led to the kind of diplomatic breakthrough that would reshape interspecies relations for generations to come. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for someone to ask the right question. What happens when you let alien babies choose their own favorite humans? The answer, as it turned out, was everything.